Sometimes betrayal doesn't arrive with loud footsteps or angry words. Sometimes it slips quietly into your life, wearing the faces you trust the most. The morning everything changed, I woke up on the cold tile floor of my bathroom staring at the ceiling light, wondering why my left arm wouldn't move. At first I thought I had just slipped. I remember the faint smell of lavender soap still lingering in the air, and the sound of the faucet dripping steadily into the sink. But when I tried to push myself up, nothing happened. My arm lay beside me like it didn't belong to my body anymore. That's when the fear crept in, slow, heavy, undeniable. I tried to call out, but the sound that left my mouth didn't sound like my voice. It sounded small, weak, like someone else entirely. The last thing I remember before the sirens was staring at the family photo hanging on the hallway wall. My son, my daughter, and my grandchildren smiling back at me, and thinking I hope someone comes. Then everything faded into flashing lights and voices I couldn't quite understand. When I opened my eyes again, the world smelled like antiseptic and sounded like machines breathing. A steady beep echoed somewhere near my head. I blinked slowly, trying to focus on the blurry shapes around me, until the face of a nurse leaned into view. "Well, there you are," she said gently. "You gave us a bit of a scare." My throat felt dry like I hadn't swallowed in days. "Where?" I whispered. "You're in the hospital. You had a stroke, but you're stable now." Stroke. The word settled heavily in my chest, but strangely I didn't feel panic. Just a quiet disbelief. Like hearing news about someone else's life instead of my own. I turned my head slowly toward the window. Morning light stretched across the floor, pale and soft, like the world was trying to be gentle with me. And that's when the first thought entered my mind. I need to call my children. By 8:30 that morning I was sitting upright with pillows stacked behind my back, my phone resting in my trembling hand. I called my son first. The phone rang, and rang until it went to voicemail. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's Mom. I'm in the hospital. I had a small stroke, but I'm okay. I'd really like to see you when you can." I hung up and stared at the screen for a moment before dialing my daughter. Straight to voicemail again. "Hi, baby," I whispered. "It's Mom. I'm at Memorial Hospital. I'm alright, just a little scared. Call me when you get this." I set the phone down beside me and watched the door, expecting it to open at any moment. But it didn't. Hospitals have a strange way of stretching time. Minutes feel like hours and hours feel like days. Nurses came and went, adjusting machines, checking my vitals, offering small smiles that felt kind but temporary. Across the hallway, I could hear laughter spilling out of another room. Visitors bringing flowers, voices filled with relief and warmth. Every time footsteps passed my door, I looked up, expecting to see familiar faces. But each time they kept walking. By afternoon, the sunlight had shifted across the floor, and still nothing. I told myself they were busy. They probably hadn't heard their phones. Maybe they were at work or driving, or caught up in something important. There were 100 reasonable explanations. But as evening settled in and the sky outside turned soft shades of pink and gold, the silence started to feel heavier, lonelier. The nurse on the evening shift, a young woman with kind eyes named Jasmine, paused while checking my blood pressure. "Is your family coming by tonight?" she asked gently. "I'm sure they will," I said with a small smile. "They probably just haven't gotten my messages yet." Something flickered in her expression, but she nodded politely. "Well, if you need anything, just press the button." When she left, I stared at the empty chair beside my bed, the one meant for visitors, and tried not to let my thoughts wander too far. Because deep down, a quiet voice was beginning to whisper something I didn't want to hear. Night in a hospital feels different than anywhere else. The halls grow quieter, the lights dim slightly, and the world feels suspended between breaths. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of the monitor beside me, and thought about the years that had led me here. Raising 2 children on my own after their father passed. Working long shifts. Missing holidays. Saving every spare dollar to make sure they never felt the absence of anything. I remembered school plays, late-night homework sessions, scraped knees, birthdays filled with laughter. Back then, I never imagined there would come a day when I'd be lying in a hospital bed, wondering if they'd show up. The next morning came and went much like the first. More tests, more nurses, more waiting. Still no calls back. By the third day, the silence had stopped feeling temporary. It felt intentional. That realization didn't come all at once. It settled slowly, like dust drifting through sunlight, until it covered everything. I stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes. Stopped watching the door. Stopped expecting. And in that quiet acceptance, something inside me shifted. Not anger, not yet, just a deep aching sadness. On the fourth afternoon, Jasmine walked into my room holding her phone, her expression hesitant. "Mrs. Dalton," she said softly, "I'm not sure if I should show you this." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" She hesitated, then turned the screen toward me. And that's when everything changed. I stared at the photo, my heart suddenly beating louder than the machines around me. Bright sunlight. A familiar face. Smiling. Standing somewhere far away. Somewhere beautiful. Somewhere that looked nothing like a hospital room. My breath caught in my throat as a strange numbness spread through my chest. For a moment I couldn't look away. Couldn't fully process what I was seeing. Because the truth was beginning to form, slowly, painfully, like a crack spreading through glass. Jasmine watched me carefully. "I thought you should know," she said quietly. I nodded, but my mind felt far away, like I was watching my own life from across the room. And in that moment a realization settled over me. Quiet but unmistakable. The kind of realization that changes everything once you see it clearly. That night I didn't cry. I didn't yell or call anyone or ask questions. I just lay there in the dim hospital light, staring at the ceiling, letting the silence wrap around me like a blanket. Because something inside me had gone very still, very calm. And somewhere deep down a thought began to form. Not fully shaped yet, but undeniable. If they could walk away from me that easily, then maybe it was time I started thinking about walking away too. But I had no idea yet just how far this would go. Or how much I was about to discover once I finally went home. Because the real shock wasn't waiting in that hospital room. It was waiting behind my own front door. And by the time I saw it, nothing in my life would ever be the same again. That night, after Jasmine left my room, the hospital felt quieter than it ever had before. The steady beeping of the monitor beside my bed sounded louder somehow, like it was echoing inside my chest. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying the image over and over in my mind, trying to convince myself I had misunderstood what I saw. But deep down I knew I hadn't. Because when you've lived long enough, you learn to recognize the difference between confusion and truth. And the truth was settling in slowly, painfully, like cold rain seeping through the cracks of a roof you thought was solid. The next morning I woke before sunrise, the pale blue light filtering through the curtains casting soft shadows across the room. For a few seconds I forgot everything. Then it all came rushing back. The silence. The unanswered calls. The photo. My chest tightened, but instead of panic, I felt something else beginning to take shape. A quiet awareness that something wasn't right. Something much bigger than just missed phone calls. Jasmine came in shortly after with my breakfast tray, offering a gentle smile. "How are you feeling today?" she asked. I hesitated, then said softly, "Can I see that photo again?" She nodded, pulling out her phone. This time I looked closer. My daughter stood beneath a bright blue sky, the Eiffel Tower rising behind her like something out of a postcard. Her arms were stretched wide, her smile radiant and carefree. The caption read, "Dreams really do come true." My fingers trembled slightly as I looked at the date. The day after, I had been admitted to the hospital. There were more photos. My Sony's laughing outside a cafe. My grandchildren are holding pastries, powdered sugar dusting their smiles. A group photo at a restaurant, everyone gathered close together, glasses raised in celebration. They looked complete. Happy. Like nothing was missing. I handed the phone back slowly, my heart feeling strangely hollow. "They didn't tell you about the trip?" Jasmine asked gently. I shook my head. "No, they didn't mention anything." She placed her hand lightly on my arm for a moment before leaving the room, her expression full of quiet sympathy. And for the first time since arriving at the hospital, I felt something sharper than sadness begin to stir beneath the surface. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. That afternoon I called my son again. Voicemail. I didn't leave a message this time. I just stared at the phone for a moment before setting it down, a strange calm settling over me. Because sometimes silence tells you everything you need to know. Over the next 2 days, my strength slowly returned. Physical therapy sessions helped me regain movement in my arm. Each small improvement a reminder that my body was healing, even if my heart felt heavier than ever. Jasmine stopped by often, her quiet presence comforting in a way she probably didn't even realize. But the chair beside my bed remained empty. No flowers, no visitors, no familiar voices. Just the steady hum of machines and the quiet realization that I was alone. On the morning of my discharge, sunlight streamed through the window, warm and golden, like the world was welcoming me back. I packed my small bag slowly, folding each item carefully, trying not to think too far ahead, because I wasn't sure what awaited me at home anymore. Patricia, my neighbor, arrived to pick me up, her face lighting up with relief when she saw me. "Oh honey, I'm so glad you're okay," she said, wrapping me in a gentle hug. The kindness in her voice nearly broke me. "Thank you for coming," I whispered. "Of course," she said firmly. "That's what neighbors are for." As we drove through the familiar streets, I watched the world pass by outside the window. People walking dogs, children riding bikes, life moving forward as if nothing had changed. But inside me, everything felt different. When we pulled into my driveway, my heart sank. The lawn was overgrown, the flower beds dry and neglected. Newspapers lay scattered across the porch, yellowed and curling at the edges. The mailbox overflowed with unopened letters spilling onto the ground. "Did anyone check on the house while you were gone?" Patricia asked quietly. "I assumed my son would," I said softly. But as I stepped out of the car, a sinking feeling settled deep in my stomach. Inside, the air felt stale and warm. The kitchen smelled faintly sour, and I quickly discovered why. Spoiled food still sat in the refrigerator, untouched for days. No one had come. Not once. The realization settled heavily on my chest as I walked slowly through the rooms, each step echoing louder than it should have. This house had always felt like a sanctuary. Now it felt strangely empty. That afternoon, Patricia helped me gather the pile of mail from the porch, setting it neatly on the kitchen table. Bills, advertisements, bank envelopes. And then one thick envelope caught my attention. My credit card statement. I stared at it for a moment, unsure why my heart had suddenly started beating faster. Then I opened it. The first page looked normal: groceries, pharmacy charges, gas. But when I turned the page, my breath caught. June 3rd, airline ticket purchase. June 4th, hotel charge. June 5th, restaurant. June 6th, designer store. Line after line, charges from places thousands of miles away. Paris. My hands began to tremble as I reached the total at the bottom of the page. Over $4,000. Charged while I was lying in a hospital bed. Patricia stood beside me, reading over my shoulder, her face tightening with disbelief. "They used your card?" she asked softly. I nodded slowly, the reality settling over me like a heavy weight. "I didn't even know they still had access," I whispered. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker, like the walls were closing in around me. Because this wasn't just neglect. It was something deeper, something far more painful. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table long after Patricia had gone home. The statement spread out in front of me. The house was quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. And for the first time since leaving the hospital, I felt anger begin to rise beneath the surface. Slow, cold, steady. I thought about the years of sacrifice, the long nights, the holidays spent working, the moments I had given everything so they would never feel a lack. Now, this. I stared at the numbers again, my mind beginning to shift from disbelief to something else entirely. Because when the shock fades, clarity takes its place. And clarity can be powerful. I realized then that I didn't know nearly as much as I thought I did about what had been happening behind the scenes of my own life. And that realization felt like standing at the edge of something deep and unknown. That night I made a quiet decision. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of the sudden, undeniable need to understand the truth. Because something told me this was only the beginning. That if I looked closer, I might discover things I was never meant to see. I folded the statement carefully and placed it back into the envelope, my hands steady now. The house felt silent around me, but for the first time since leaving the hospital, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like the calm before a storm, because deep down I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The life I thought I had was about to change forever. That night I didn't sleep. Not really. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the faint glow from the streetlight outside casting long shadows across the room, while my mind replayed the numbers from the statement over and over again. $4,000. Restaurants. Flights. Hotel charges. All while I was lying in a hospital bed, trying to learn how to move my arm again. But what unsettled me most wasn't the amount. It was the realization that I had no idea how long this had been happening. Because when trust is broken, it doesn't just crack, it makes you question everything you thought was solid. By morning, exhaustion had settled into my bones, but my mind felt sharper than it had in years. Clear. Focused. Determined. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, spreading the statement out in front of me like evidence in a case I hadn't realized I was part of. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I should have asked long ago. What else don't I know? Around 7:30, my phone rang. It was Patricia. How are you holding up? She asked gently. I need to start looking at everything, I said quietly. All my accounts. Everything. There was a pause. That sounds like a good idea, she said carefully. Do you want me to come over? Yes, I whispered, because suddenly I didn't want to do this alone. By mid-morning, we sat at my dining room table surrounded by folders, bank envelopes, and my laptop. The sunlight streaming through the window felt almost too bright for the heaviness settling in the room. Patricia opened my online banking page while I watched, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. At first, everything looked normal. Monthly deposits, utility payments, groceries. But then Patricia stopped scrolling. Lindsay, she said softly. What's this? I leaned forward, my heart beginning to pound. A transfer. $2,000. The date. The first of last month. Then another. And another. Each month. Same amount. Same external account. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. I didn't authorize those, I whispered. Patricia's expression darkened. How many months? She asked quietly. We counted together. 6. $12,000 gone. Just like that. A cold wave of realization washed over me, leaving me feeling suddenly unsteady. Because this wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern. And patterns don't happen by accident. I think you should talk to a lawyer, Patricia said gently. The word hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. A lawyer. The idea felt surreal, like stepping into someone else's life instead of my own. But deep down I knew she was right. Because whatever was happening, it was bigger than I had imagined. That afternoon, I sat across from Daniel Foster, the attorney who had helped with my husband's estate years ago. His office smelled faintly of leather and paper, the quiet hum of the air conditioner filling the space between us. He listened without interrupting as I explained everything: the hospital stay, the Paris trip, the credit card charges, the transfers. When I finished, he folded his hands and looked at me with a seriousness that made my stomach tighten. Have you authorized any of these transactions? He asked. No, I said firmly. And no one has power of attorney? No. He nodded slowly. Then we need to look deeper, he said. 3 days later, he called and asked me to come back to his office immediately. Something in his voice made my heart drop before I even hung up the phone. Patricia drove me there, the silence in the car heavy with unspoken worry. When we walked into his office, a thick folder sat on his desk. He didn't smile this time. I'm going to be very direct, he said gently. What I found is serious. My hands gripped the armrests of the chair. He opened the folder and slid a document toward me. A loan application. My name is at the top. My address. My signature at the bottom. I never signed this, I whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. I know. My chest tightened. The loan amount is $150,000, he said quietly. The room seemed to tilt slightly as the words sank in. 150,000? He nodded again. It was taken out against your house. The silence that followed felt deafening. Because there are moments in life when reality shifts so suddenly that your mind struggles to catch up. And this was one of them. Who took the loan? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel met my eyes. Your son. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. For a moment I couldn't speak, couldn't think. Couldn't even fully process what I had just heard. Because betrayal at that level doesn't feel real at first. Feels impossible. He used your house as collateral, Daniel continued softly. And the loan is now in default. The room spun slightly as the full weight of his words settled over me. What happens if it's not paid? I asked, my voice shaking. They can foreclose, he said quietly. The word echoed in my mind like a distant thunderclap. Foreclose. Lose my home. The house where I raised my children. Where every memory lived. All because of something I never even knew existed. A deep silence filled the room, thick with shock and disbelief. Patricia reached over and squeezed my hand, grounding me in the moment. Daniel leaned forward slightly. We can fight this, he said gently. But we need to act quickly. As we left the office, the world outside felt strangely distant. Like I was walking through a dream I couldn't wake up from. Cars passed. People talked. Life continued as if nothing had changed. But inside me, everything had shifted. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about trust. About betrayal. About realizing the people I loved most had been living a different reality than I had imagined. That night, I sat alone in my living room, the house quiet around me. The walls that once felt comforting now felt unfamiliar. Like I was seeing them for the first time. Because when the foundation of trust cracks, even familiar places start to feel different. I thought about my children. About birthdays and bedtime stories and scraped knees. About the years I spent believing love would always be enough to keep us close. And slowly, something inside me shifted again. Not anger. Not yet. Something calmer. Stronger. Like clarity settling into place. Because deep down I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't ignore what I had learned. And I couldn't keep living the way I had before. That night I made a decision. A quiet one. But a powerful one. I was going to protect myself. No matter what it took. Because the truth was no longer something I could avoid. And once you see the truth clearly, there's no going back to who you were before. There's a moment that comes after betrayal. After the shock, after the disbelief. When everything goes quiet inside you. Not empty. Not broken. Just quiet. Like standing in the stillness after a storm. Realizing the landscape has changed forever. That's where I found myself the morning after meeting with Daniel. Sitting at my kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the wood. The house is silent except for the ticking clock on the wall. For years this house had been my safe place. Now it felt like a reminder of everything I thought I knew. And everything I didn't. I wrapped my hands around my coffee mug, letting the warmth steady me, and for the first time since this began, I allowed myself to ask a question I had been avoiding. What happens now? The answer came slowly. Not from anger. Not from revenge. But from something deeper. A quiet understanding that I could no longer live the same life I had before. Because once trust is broken at its foundation, you either rebuild or you walk away. And I knew deep down I couldn't rebuild what had been lost. That afternoon, Patricia and I sat across from Daniel in his office again. The thick folder still rested on his desk, but this time I felt different. Steadier somehow, like I had stepped into a version of myself I hadn't met before. What are my options? I asked. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his voice calm and measured. We can pursue legal action, he said. Or you can sell the house, pay off the loan, and protect your remaining assets. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Sell the house. The idea felt impossible at first, like imagining life without gravity. But as I sat there, something surprising happened. Instead of panic, I felt clarity. Because this house wasn't just walls and memories anymore. It was collateral. It was a risk. It was a reminder of betrayal. I want to sell, I said quietly. Patricia squeezed my hand. Daniel nodded slowly. I'll contact a realtor, he said. And just like that, the decision was made. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Meetings. Paperwork. Phone calls. The realtor walked through each room, pointing out features, talking about market value, and discussing listing timelines. I listened quietly, nodding when appropriate, but inside I felt strangely calm, like watching a chapter of my life closing from a distance. Packing began the following week. Boxes lined the hallways, each one filled with pieces of a life built over decades. Photographs. Old letters. holiday decorations. Every item held a memory, and with each one I packed, I felt both sadness and relief intertwine, because letting go is painful, but it can also be freeing. One evening, I stood in the living room surrounded by half-packed boxes, holding a framed photo of my children when they were young. They were laughing, arms wrapped around each other, their faces full of innocence and joy. I traced the edge of the frame with my finger, a soft ache settling in my chest. Because love doesn't disappear when trust is broken. It just changes shape. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a blank piece of paper in front of me. For a long time I just stared at it, unsure where to begin. Then slowly I picked up my pen, and I started writing. The words came carefully, each one chosen with intention. Not cruel, not angry, just honest. I wrote about what I had discovered, about the loan, about the charges, about the silence while I was in the hospital, and I wrote about the decision I had made, that I was selling the house, that my will had been changed, that I was moving on. When I finished, I read the letter twice, my hand steady, my heart calm, because this wasn't about punishment. It was about boundaries, about choosing peace over pain. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope. The moving truck arrived on a quiet Thursday morning. The sound of boxes being loaded echoed through the empty rooms as the house slowly transformed into something unrecognizable. With each passing hour, the space felt less like a home and more like a memory. By sunset, the rooms were bare, echoing, still. I walked through each room one last time, letting my hand brush lightly against the walls, remembering laughter, celebrations, and quiet moments that once filled the space. Then I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. The sound of the lock clicking felt final, but not painful, just complete. 2 days later, I woke up in a small rental cottage near the coast, the sound of waves faint in the distance. The air smelled different here, salty, fresh, alive. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe fully. Like I had stepped into a new chapter of my life, one that belonged entirely to me. But peace didn't mean the story was over, because actions have consequences. And consequences eventually arrive. 3 days after the move, my phone began ringing. My son's name flashed across the screen. I watched it ring until it stopped. Then came the messages. What is going on? Call me immediately. You had no right to do this. I placed the phone face down on the table, my heart steady. Because for the first time I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. Later that evening, Daniel called. They've seen the letter, he said calmly. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. How did they respond? They're angry, he said gently. But legally you're protected. A quiet sense of relief settled over me. Not victory, just peace. That night I sat on the small porch outside the cottage, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft shades of gold and pink. The air felt warm against my skin, the sound of waves steady and soothing. For the first time in a long time my thoughts felt quiet. Not empty. Just calm, because sometimes the most powerful decision you can make isn't about fighting back. It's about walking away. But I didn't know yet that the hardest moment was still ahead, because a few weeks later, there would be a knock on my door, and everything I thought I had resolved would be tested one last time. The knock came just after noon on a quiet Tuesday, the kind of knock that isn't loud but carries weight. I was standing in the kitchen of the little cottage, rinsing a coffee cup, when the sound echoed through the small space. For a moment I froze, my heart skipping slightly because somehow, I already knew who it might be. When you've lived long enough, you learn to recognize the feeling of unfinished chapters trying to reopen. I dried my hands slowly and walked toward the door, the soft creak of the wooden floor beneath my feet louder than usual. Through the small window beside the door, I saw a familiar figure standing on the porch. My daughter. And beside her my granddaughter, holding her hand tightly. My breath caught, not from shock, but from the sudden rush of memories that flooded my chest, birthdays, bedtime stories, laughter echoing through hallways that now existed only in memory. For a moment I considered not opening the door, because healing sometimes requires distance. But my granddaughter shifted nervously on her feet, her small hand clutching a folded piece of paper, and I knew she didn't deserve to stand outside carrying the weight of adult mistakes. So I opened it. My daughter's eyes filled with tears the moment she saw me. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. I stepped aside quietly. You can come in, I said softly. They entered slowly, the small living room suddenly feeling even smaller with the weight of everything unspoken hanging in the air. My granddaughter looked around with wide eyes, taking in the simple space, then turned back to me with a shy smile. Hi, Grandma, she said softly. My heart softened instantly, the warmth of her voice breaking through layers of hurt I didn't even realize were still there. Hi, sweetheart, I said, kneeling slightly to meet her eyes. She held out the folded paper. I made this for you. I opened it carefully. A crayon drawing filled the page. A small blue house near the ocean, two stick figures holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. At the top, written in careful letters, I love you, Grandma. Tears blurred my vision as I looked at it, the simple innocence of the drawing carrying more meaning than words ever could. It's beautiful, I whispered, pulling her into a gentle hug. When I stood again, my daughter watched quietly, her face filled with a mixture of regret and hope. I'm so sorry, she said softly. The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy at the same time. I didn't know about the loan, she continued, her voice shaking. I should have checked. I should have come to the hospital. I should have been there. I listened quietly, letting her words settle without interrupting, because sometimes people need to say things out loud to fully understand them. I believed everything would be fine, she said, wiping her eyes. I didn't realize how much you were hurting. I nodded slowly. I know, I said gently, because the truth was I did know. And understanding didn't erase the pain, but it did soften the edges of it. We sat together in the quiet living room, sunlight streaming through the window, the sound of distant waves filling the silence between us. For a long moment no one spoke. Then I said the words I had been thinking for weeks. I love you, I said softly. That hasn't changed. But love alone isn't enough when there isn't respect. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I understand, she whispered. I needed to choose peace, I continued. I needed to protect myself. I know, she said again, her voice barely audible. And for the first time since everything began, the conversation felt honest. Not defensive. Not angry. Just real. My granddaughter climbed onto the couch beside me, leaning her head gently against my arm. Mommy says you live by the ocean now, she said. I smiled softly. Yes, I do. Do you like it? I love it, I said honestly. She smiled, satisfied, like that answer made everything okay in her world. After a while, my daughter stood, wiping her eyes. Thank you for letting us come, she said. I nodded gently. You're always welcome to visit, I said softly. But I need time. And space. I understand, she said again. And for the first time I believe she truly did. When they left, the cottage felt quiet again, but not empty. The drawing remained on the table. A small reminder that even after storms, something gentle can remain. That evening I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and purple. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, steady and calm, its rhythm soothing in a way words never could. I thought about everything that had happened, the hospital, the betrayal, the decisions, the confrontation. And for the first time I didn't feel anger. Just acceptance. Because choosing yourself doesn't mean you stop loving others. It means you finally learn how to love yourself too. Months passed quietly after that. I settled into a new routine: morning walks along the beach, volunteering at a local clinic, evenings spent reading on the porch. Life felt slower, simpler, peaceful. Sometimes I still felt sadness when I thought about the past. But it was a gentle sadness, like remembering a chapter that had ended rather than a wound that hadn't healed. And with time even that softened. On my birthday the following year, I woke before sunrise and walked down to the shoreline. The cool sand beneath my feet grounding me in the moment. The sky slowly brightened, the first rays of sunlight stretching across the water like a promise of new beginnings. I stood there watching the horizon, breathing deeply, feeling a quiet sense of gratitude fill my chest. Because despite everything I was still here. Still strong. Still capable of choosing my own path. Later that morning, I opened my journal and wrote a single sentence. It's never too late to start over. Because the truth is, life doesn't always unfold the way we expect. People disappoint us. Trust is broken. Plans change. But even in the midst of loss, there is always the possibility of something new. Something peaceful, something honest, something real. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt invisible, forgotten, or taken for granted, I want you to know something. You are not too old to choose yourself. You are not too tired to start again. And you are not alone. The waves rolled steadily against the shore as the sun climbed higher, the world moving forward the way it always does. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace with where I stood. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had finally learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let go.